The title of this book is The Normal Christian Bird. It is written by our beloved brother David Paulson. We are in chapter 3. We continue in chapter 3, subpart 3. Chapter 3, subpart 3. Verbalization can be done in solitude, but talking to oneself in God, however edifying or profitable, is not usually a sign of mental stability, much less spiritual benefit. Saving faith is expressed by talking to others. It is only spoken aloud in their hearing, and it is only because they are listening that the wall of faith become effective. The first and foremost example of this verbal expression is the direct address of Jesus by name when seeking salvation. Peter quoted Joel to this effect in his first sermon at Pentecost. Everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. Joel chapter 2, verse 32, in Acts chapter 2, verse 2 and 1. And it was soon obvious that he interpreted this prediction as a reference to Jesus. It is very striking how frequently the name of Jesus is referred to thereafter in the book of Acts in God, Acts chapter 2, verse 38, Acts chapter 3, verse 6, Acts chapter 4, verse 7, Acts chapter 4, verse 10, Acts chapter 4, verse 12, Acts chapter 4, verse 17, Acts chapter 4, verse 18, Acts chapter 4, verse 30, Acts chapter 5, verse 28, Acts chapter 5, verse 40, Acts chapter 5, verse 41, etc. Other incidental references indicate that new disciples were encouraged to call on Jesus by name, particularly at the time of their baptism in God, Acts chapter 22, verse 16. The Gospels are full of examples of men and women who did just this. A classic case is the blind man who refused to keep quiet until Jesus heard him in God, Mark chapter 10, verse 46 to 52. Jesus' statement to him, "Go, your faith has healed you," must not be taken to mean that by shouting he had healed himself, but that his determining word had been the means of releasing the healing power of Jesus into his body. Perhaps the very reason why the gospel writer recorded so many stories like this was to encourage a later generation to do likewise, even though they would not have been in a position to see or hear him physically. After all, the blind man at Jericho couldn't see him either. To address Jesus aloud by name is to express belief in his presence as well as his continual existence. It is precisely because he is alive and around and caught by his spirit that such words of faith are so effective. "I cried unto the Lord, and he heard me" is as true of Jesus in the New Testament as of Yahweh in the Old. It is highly unlikely that liturgical recitation qualify as a word of faith. The Lord alone knew how many members of a congregation repeating Christ have mercy upon us at the appropriate stage in a service are really seeking his mercy, or even realizing how much they need it. Repetition of another's word, unless they spring spontaneously to mind, is not usually a genuine cry from the heart for help. In God, see chapter 31 for a critique of the use of the sinner's prayer in evangelism. To call is associated with that raised tone of voice that is natural to a mood of accurate anxiety due to a realization of real peril. In a word, it is the cry of someone in urgent need of being saved. Paul's statement about the need to verbalize faith is probably the most widely quoted. In God, if you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For it is with your heart that you believe and are justified, and it is with your mouth that you confess and are saved. Romans chapter 10, verse 9 to 10. But it needs carefully unpacking. But it needs careful unpacking. He is applying to the gospel a principle originally attributed by Moses to the law in Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 11 to 14. The link between the two is righteousness demanded by the law and offered by the gospel. In both cases, this righteousness is not a distant standard far beyond reach, but is near to a person as the word on their lips. Indeed, to express it in speech is the first step to attaining it. And God, Joshua chapter 1, verse 8. In the case of law righteousness, this involves recitation of the law of Moses, but in the case of faith righteousness, it involves confession of the lordship of Jesus. Note that the commandments have been replaced by the Christ as the way of righteousness. But confess to whom? Most Bible students have to readily assume that this refers to a confession before men, either as a creedal statement with a believer in God translation, which put Jesus is Lord in inverted cosmos and invite this interpretation, or as a simple testimony to unbeliever. But the context is one of trusting in the Lord and calling on his name. You can see verse 11 and 13 of Romans chapter 10. And the primarily reference could therefore be to addressing Jesus himself as Lord, God, as Paul himself had done in the Damascus Road in God Act chapter 22, verse 8 to 10. However, the two directions of such a confession are not mutually exclusive. Maybe Paul himself had a double application in mind: to confess Jesus as Lord to his face. However, the two directions of such a confession are not mutually exclusive. Maybe Paul himself had a double application in mind: to confess Jesus as Lord to his face need to be followed by the same confession in the face of others, especially those who do not believe it yet, thought one day they will have to acknowledge his position in God, Philippians chapter 2, verse 9 to 11. It is a common motive in the gospel and the epistle that our confessing a relationship with Christ before men and his confessing a relationship with us before his Father are inextricably linked. In God, Mark chapter 8, verse 38, 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 11 to 13. Confessing our recognition of his lordship to Jesus himself is an act of faith that makes it possible to have his righteousness in our life. Confessing it to others is an act of faith that makes it very necessary. Such confession may be the very first real act of faith a disciple takes, but it must not be the last. Faith is practical. Faith is practical. You have already noted that faith is something we do rather than something we have. In God, hence, the New Testament preference for the verb rather than the noun. John records an interesting exchange between Jesus and the crowd. They asked him, "What must we do to do the work God requires?" And go. The reply, "The work of God is this, to believe in the one he has sent." In God, John chapter 6, verse 28 to 29. A modern evangelical might have replied, "You mustn't even try to do any work. Simply believe." But that would be an oversimplification. To believe is to be obedient to the faith. God, Acts chapter 6, verse 7. New Testament faith is very practical. It is a great pity that the word work has taken on such a negative connotation, especially so amongst those who built their theology largely, if not entirely, on Paul's teaching.